See, we're still getting settled. Hi, I'm Tony Perez, NATOA president, and with the City of Seattle, I want to welcome you all to NATOA's 34th, I believe, annual conference. That was easy. We have a great program for you today on the importance of gigabit in our communities. And throughout the week, I really want to thank the conference committee for putting together what I think is a stellar agenda. We're going to cover a lot of different issues: broadband, right away, deployment of wireless facilities in our community, adoption of broadband services, you name it. It covers a wide spectrum, and no pun intended there. This is, I think, my 18th NATOA conference. I think I started coming in 1996. And when you think back about the developments in communications from that time, it's really remarkable. I think in 96, we were just beginning to see the introduction of cable modem service, and a lot of us were really happy we no longer had to deal with the death screech of trying to get online by dial-up. Does anybody remember the speeds at that time of 1996 on cable modem? Was it 6 megabits per second, something, maybe not even. I think it was 1.5. And just think back a few years ago into 1997 was the first year, 2007 was the first year that Apple came out with the iPhone. And think about how much things have changed since then. So I think that puts the discussion about gigabit service into perspective, that the importance to me of gigabit is that the network itself is no longer going to be a barrier to the imagination or to innovation. So if you think that we've seen a lot of changes over the last 7 years since the introduction of the iPhone, I think that the pace of change and innovation and new services and applications is only going to accelerate with the introduction of broadband networks, because they really are a platform for innovation that can harness the collective ingenuity of our communities to develop applications and services for healthcare, education, municipal services, and so forth. So as we move now to the cloud, as we move to over-the-top video, I can only imagine what will be coming down the road. So what does that mean for you in your community is to understand that this is transformative technology. And whether you have a gig or thinking about getting a gig, these things matter. They matter to your community. It's different for everyone. And some of us will have the competition that's needed to incent the private sector to build out these networks and provide services at rates that most of our citizens can afford. Some of us may not have that option and need to be thinking about what they can do to either incent private investment or to take matters into their own hands. But if I had to leave you with one message for this morning's session, is that one way or another, you need to think about strategically about how you make gigabit connectivity a reality in your community. So with that, I'm going to stop. I want to remind everyone to attend the, speaking of gigabit, the Google Fiber happy hour today at 5:45. I think it's going to be downstairs. Also, if you're new to the NATOA conference, we have a lot of experts here from both industry, local government, FCC staff will be here. Don't be afraid to ask questions and go up and just meet people and attend our affinity dinners where you will partake with like-minded individuals who are dealing with the same issues that you are on a day-to-day basis. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug Adams, who is going to moderate our first panel this morning. And thanks again for being here, everyone.
So growing up in Big Ten country, which I always consider the Midwest, this is my first time in Minneapolis, so thanks everybody for hosting us. Minneapolis, St. Paul, I guess. But I guess the Midwest is now New Jersey and Maryland, too, if you look at it from a Big Ten perspective. So our session today is, Are You Gigging Me? And somebody's got to own up to that title. Anybody? And we've got three great presenters. The presenters here, we've had a few changes. In the order of our presenters today are going to be first Chris Janson. He's with Sienna, and he's out of Massachusetts. Chris will go first. And then Jerome Alston, he's with Margin, and he's in Big Ten country right there in Maryland. And of course, finally we have Jeremy Pietzold from Sandy, Oregon, who is not in Big Ten country yet, but maybe soon. So we're going to start with Chris. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug, and good morning. Can you hear me okay out there? All right. Hopefully I don't have to lean down into the microphone. But, sorry? It's a media thing. Turn the gain up, please. All right, well, good morning. Not that much. Turn the gain down. Turn it down. Okay, now that everyone's awake, hopefully. Again, my name's Chris Janson, and I work for Sienna. However, I've been involved in this industry. By this industry, I mean telecommunications for some 27, 28 years now. And let me explain the topic of my talk before I really get into the guts of this. You know, we can spend all day talking about speeds and feeds and gigabit networks, et cetera, but it really comes down to, I think, for a government audience, a local government audience especially, what does it really mean to you? What does it mean to your constituents? And, you know, over those 27 years, I've seen various terms, various buzzwords come in and out of vogue. And most recently...
I can't hear you.
Okay, check 1, 2. Yeah, and you hear me now. Maybe I need to hold this.
That's convenient.
Maybe I need to hold this, I'm not sure. So anyway, over the past 2 years or so, this idea of a smart city networks is really seems to have come into vogue. Well, what the heck is a smart city? So, show of hands, who recognizes this picture? Anyone? I first used this slide out in California just last week, actually, at a similar talk at Google headquarters, and people recognize this a little bit more. This is actually the Monsanto building of the future, or house of the future, which was in Disneyland back in the 70s. So I went there as a kid and thought, that's pretty cool. That's what things will be like by the. You're going to give me a different microphone. Yep, okay. Is that any better? Yay! Okay. Hopefully we won't have any more feedback. So, no one recognizes that building? It was in Disneyland from the maybe late 60s into the 70s, probably into the 80s or so. But it was Monsanto's view of what a house would look like, you know, probably by about now, by 2020, probably by the year 2000. But anyway, smart city, you know, I think of that, or maybe the monorail, or this picture here from a movie that was popular this summer, Guardians of the Galaxy, where it was a very modernistic sort of city, and I won't get into that whole theme, but the point is infrastructure is what makes a city smart, what makes, frankly, quality of life better and so forth. So I started to dig around a little bit in advance of this talk at Google last week, just to say, what's a definition of a smart city? We've got all these governments talking about building better infrastructure, and at the baseline of that is likely a gigabit network, but what are we going to do with it? Well, I found, I think, a pretty good definition from an event that's being put on up in Montreal later this year. Some of the English is a little off here, but I like a lot of the themes. First two things are about open resilience, really the idea that we can figure out what's going on out in a particular city or a particular local area and respond to that by using a network. Second thing is open government, right? Making government very accessible to its citizens. Be it something as simple as buying a parking permit, an annual parking permit online, maybe paying my taxes online. Any government function ought to be supported ultimately by a network, right? And then there's these other ideas about mobility, about transport, and energy and so forth. So it's a good kind of set of definitions that we can use. And then kind of looked forward. Forward a bit, and what I want to pull into this talk now are just a series of work that was done by the area in which I live in southeastern Massachusetts. In that area, in that region, there's a county commission called the Cape Cod Commission. Anyone from that area? I suspect this is a very Midwestern, okay, well, Lori's probably the closest. But this county commission spent a lot of time completely out of the context of a broadband network, just sort of trying to look at what are the issues that really face southeastern Mass and what does it mean. So before I get into a bit of this, I know there's a couple of faces that I saw 2 weeks ago at a conference in Springfield, Massachusetts. We had the opportunity to hear two, I think, very interesting speakers, among others. One was Susan Crawford, who some of you, probably a lot of you have heard of. And she made some interesting comments that a city needs to understand itself. In other words, before we try to do anything with infrastructure like a gigabit network, what really are the needs of that particular city or region? So think about this. This is going back to 2010 or so. The Cape Cod Commission went through a pretty rigorous study, and I can't go through all the details of that right now because we don't have the time. These guys would get mad at me and you'd all fall asleep. But there are really three fundamental bottom lines. One has to do with the environment, second, society, and the third, economy. Very sort of grand themes. But let me just give you a sample of what each of those are. With respect to environment, this area, this region of Massachusetts is primarily made up of Cape Cod. It's basically a sandbar that sticks out into the ocean, 30 miles to the east and another 30 miles up to the north. So it's very vulnerable to not only environmental effects like weather and whatnot, but as another example, its water source is made up of a sole source aquifer, as it's called, and yet within that region, there's 15 distinct towns and something like 10 distinct water districts that support a population of about 250,000 year-round residents and roughly 5 million visitors over the course of a summer season. So you've got this really sensitive issue with respect to water, sewer, solid waste disposal, and whatnot. So that's an environmental issue. The other is society. Now, I grew up in Barnstable County, and when I was in high school, or thereabouts, there was a fair number of young people there. But at this day and age, in 2014, Barnstable County is actually the oldest population, not only in Massachusetts, but actually in the entire Northeast. So that implies a lot of things with respect to healthcare, with respect to services for seniors, and even with respect to education. How are the schools sized? How do you support the educational needs of the region with that sort of makeup? And there's some other grim statistics around cancer and things like that I don't want to get into right now. The third piece, and it's obviously intertwined, is economy. How do we support the economy in the region? What is the makeup of income for people, of GDP as a result of that, local GDP, and how do you change that? How do you manage that over time? It's largely a resort area. It's largely an area that relies upon tourist income, but they want to expand that. They want to encourage commerce and other forms of business to locate and work and thrive in the area. So the bottom line on all of that, from the Cape Cod Commission standpoint, was to establish a set of initiatives. And there's 7 of them up here, which I think any of you, especially if you're in local government, will see these as being pretty familiar, that are around things like healthcare, around things like managing the water resources better, and transportation. You know, these are all pretty obvious themes. Now, you know, back to where we really want to go with this session and this talk, what really do we need with respect to a communications infrastructure? And another very interesting tidbit from the Springfield conference was a comment that Susan Crawford made with respect to gigabit networks or broadband networks. And she called them sort of the substrate of a modern infrastructure. So if you accept that some of these issues, some of these topics are what Barnstable County needs to address in its infrastructure, then some form of broadband network needs to be there as that substrate upon which government can be built. Well, it turns out in southeastern Mass, we've built out a network called Open Cape over the past 4 or 5 years, and this is an open access fiber optic backbone. The last mile issue has not really been addressed yet, but they're working on that pretty aggressively. And so now you've got this fundamental piece of infrastructure that the county commission and that private and public entities need to work on and take advantage of. So again, those were your set of smarter city initiatives. What really makes a region smarter? What are we after? How can I come up with a broad sort of set of definitions? So think of it this way. To make any initiative smarter, any of those 7 things, or whatever topics you may be facing in your local community, it is true that there's any sort of sense of sensors that we might be able to deploy to sort of figure out what's going on out there in the region. Bear with me what that means in a second. Think for any sort of sense, be it sight or sound or whatnot. And we always come back to either traffic or energy as the 2 things we could migrate towards. And so let's go with the traffic analogy for a second. If I see that there's potentially a problem out here on the interstate, and maybe we need to initiate a lane closure, that information needs to come back somehow, either to a person or a processing center or some sort of computing infrastructure needs to be put in place, which provides feedback. So some of you might get the language here, but so the most simplistic thing, all right, there's an accident out there in the interstate, and the DOT needs to create a merge up ahead in the interstate for a lane closure. We'll tell people about that ahead of time and tell them to drive smart, use your blinker. So anyway, point is, in order to make all that happen, whatever area of infrastructure that I'm considering, you need to have a network. There needs to be a network that connects sensors and actuators, meaning what am I seeing and what can I do about it, to the computing power that's resident someplace in a data center or through a set of protocols or whatnot. So it's that network that we're most interested in, at least today. And I want to bring another little story in just from last week. Again, as I told some of my panelists here the other day, at that talk at Google, I was preceded by a gentleman by the name of Peter Marks, who was from Los Angeles. And he started his talk by asking, when you think of Los Angeles, what comes to mind first? Sorry? Yeah, exactly. So he said 2 things. Either people say Hollywood, and in fact, on the phone the other day, that's what Jerome said. Either Hollywood or traffic jams. So now that's important to him as the CTO of Los Angeles, because he's sitting there thinking, how do I make a difference with respect to using a network that LA has access to, by that I mean a communications network, and the problems that face the city. And so their initiatives are square on right on transportation, and they're doing some pretty interesting things in that regard. But anyway, so that's his effort to try and break the status quo. And that message is very different, or that initiative would be very different from maybe his counterpart in Montreal, where not only do they have traffic problems there, but they also have severe winter problems up there, as you might have here in the Twin Cities area. So So not only do you need to think about using the infrastructure to manage traffic flows, but also maybe weather as well is a bigger topic up there. So a point really I want to leave you with on this is think about ways that you can utilize a broadband network to affect fundamental change with respect to what your local government is doing, what services you're providing to your citizens and so forth. So a couple of examples of that, and then I'll move on. The energy grid. The term, again, like I said earlier, these terms come into vogue in interesting ways and sort of germinate in places you don't expect. But smart grid was sort of the first set of usage of the words smart grid, smart city, smart infrastructure that I'd heard maybe 4 years or so ago. And that's because a lot of utilities, be they municipal or privately owned, are just looking at ways to optimize their operations. So utilizing a communications network to better manage when energy is generated, how it's transmitted across really aging electrical infrastructure, and then also help the end user, us consumers, better utilize that power. So that's what smart grid is all about. So think about, I'm sure there's some of you out there that either have municipal power plants in your communities or know of others that do, but this is, would be quite relevant to you. So that's smart energy grid. Another one is transportation. In Colorado, they've recently built out a statewide, anyone from Colorado here? So, Doug. So in Colorado, your state DOT is built out and is continuing to build out some, pretty powerful fiber optic based infrastructure initially to support DOT, so that it'll, at least when you pull out of downtown Denver, you know how long it's going to take you to get to Vail. And it's critical, right? So again, following national DOT guidelines or whatnot to provide a better service to your constituents. So a couple thoughts on how these networks might be built, right? There's a lot of different ways that one can construct a smart city network. And I think, how you actually do that is largely dependent upon what's already there. That is to say, maybe the competitive landscape or infrastructure that's in place. A lot of that's perhaps also dependent upon how much money you have access to, right? These things don't come free. We want to be considering what the long-term investment is and what the return might be from the city, for the city. So just a couple of building blocks that I put out there. The concept is that we want to build a base layer optical infrastructure. When I talked about Open Cape, that's really what they've built out yet. But what they don't have yet is a last mile fiber access piece, and they don't have a lot of the other pieces that connect the actual local communities into that regional network. So think about three things. Again, physical infrastructure, software, and then applications. And where the industry is basically headed here is a bit of a jump. I mean, I'm jumping over a lot of detail, but where the industry is heading ultimately is towards virtualized network functions. So many of these applications that I show over here on the right, which could be things like local encryption, perhaps for a public safety or sheriff's office, don't necessarily have to imply a lot of physical infrastructure, a lot of hardware. So increasingly so, where we believe the industry is headed is utilizing a common physical piece of hardware that can, through software, be adapted for a lot of different uses, be that an encryption machine, be that a server, or be that a lot of things that have not yet been thought of. It's a hard idea to get your head around, but the idea is that, it jumped again, but the idea is that once you have the physical infrastructure in place, you can subscribe to certain virtual appliances that get deployed at various locations around the community. So to build that out a bit, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to point this thing. There it is. So think about a smart city sort of on-demand network. And when, at least in Siena and increasingly in the industry, when we use the term on-demand, think back a second, if you will, try to expand on what Doug said about or it was Tony, what you said about speeds and where they were in the 90s. Someone not too long ago said to me, dial-up is the perfect analogy. What we really want, though, is dial-up at really fast speeds. So in many ways, the idea of dial-up was incredibly efficient because you had these analog lines that were going all over the place, and you punched in a sequence of numbers, you transmitted your data back and forth, and then you shut down. So it was really an on-demand network. So the concept is, imagine now where perhaps you're operating a city operation that collects a lot of data and needs to back up that data in a remote location. Well, wouldn't it be perfect to turn up a big chunk of bandwidth just for a real short period of time and then shut it back down? It's the same notion. So the on-demand network, again, at its base would have this infrastructure layer. This is all the hardware and the fiber optic lines and whatnot that, if you look down at the bottom line here, that connect those sensors and actuators back to the smarts, to the processor and whatnot. And then looking up this chart, through some software layers, ultimately connects to a set of applications. So the infrastructure layer gets built out, and what we're connecting to really could be a set of government functions. They might be public safety entities, might be a municipal power plant, educational facilities or hospitals and whatnot, the whole list. All of those operating agencies within each of, for example, the different regional initiatives that I showed, going back to the Smarter Cape example. So that's the idea. What I see coming here in the not too distant future, whether the local government owns and operates some of this or buys these connections as services from a competitive provider, that's a whole different topic. I think Jeremy is going to talk about their example where they built out some locally owned infrastructure, but that's just one way to build this capability out. But to me, what's most interesting is the idea of connecting together all these different government functions, plus access for communities, for residential access into the same network. And I'm going to leave you with that. I think I'm okay on time, and we're taking questions later. Or are we just going to move on?
I'm going to ask you a quick question while we transition over to Jerome Alston of Margin. Are there plans for a last mile in place, or how does Open Cape plan to overcome those challenges?
So it's a thorny issue in a lot of ways, right? Because I know. So the competitive landscape, real quick, in most of Massachusetts, but especially on Cape Cod, is you've got Comcast and Verizon as sort of the incumbents. Verizon does not offer their fiber to the home service in that part of the state at all, I think. And then Comcast has, their Comcast service, and it's expensive, whatnot. So Open Cape is not in and of itself intending to become a last mile provider, but they are encouraging competitive, I don't want to necessarily say startups, but competitive providers to utilize the backbone. And by the way, that could be a Comcast or Verizon to take advantage of the backbone. It's open access. There are at least 2 or 3 projects that are going to touch on certain pieces of that, and pointing like this, go around the Cape, that are going to touch on some of the more densely populated portions of the Cape, and those will be building out over the next year or 2.
Great, thank you. We're going to take questions. Everybody's going to take about 15 or 20 minutes, then we're going to take questions at the end. So hold them for then. Do we have Jerome's presentation queued up? So Jerome from Maryland, he's the president of Margin. He's going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity. That's what his company does. He came through Kansas City last night, got in late. Someone said, I don't know how you can avoid the whole Chicago situation. I said, well, move to Denver. That's what I did. So. Jerome, thanks.
All right, thank you. So Margin is an IT security firm, so a lot of the discussion that I'll have today will focus a little bit on security concerning broadband. And broadband means different things to different people. It incorporates internet, but it also can mean wireless, video services, multimedia, voice, data, text, movies. So broadband means a lot of things to different organizations. And so the question becomes, well, what does it mean to you as municipalities, states, private enterprise, and so forth? It can mean simultaneous multimedia, ways of getting information between your different organizations, so connecting libraries, connecting 911 services. enable 911 call centers to receive text, voice, information that's relayed directly from the public, connecting libraries, connecting hospitals, and so forth. So broadband brings us a lot of things, allowing first responders to communicate a lot more. But one of the problems as far as getting all of those services out there, because broadband means so much more than just streaming video, is how do we use broadband to allow all of these things to work together, to allow libraries to communicate, to allow hospitals to communicate, and so forth. How do we get that to happen? And one of the things that does prevent that from happening right now is a security standpoint. So security and privacy concerns are a big reason why some organizations have not moved yet to utilizing all of the broadband services that are available to them. We all talk about that last mile piece, getting that broadband from the backbone to the home of the consumer or to the companies, to the organizations. There might be that fiber ring that's put in around the metropolitan area, but we can't get that last mile to the consumer or the last mile to the other organizations that we can use. And that's being overcome more and more now. And so one of the bigger issues is security. How do we keep those lines secure? How do we keep that information secure as we branch out beyond just multimedia video services and broadband internet services? Yes, very, very sensitive clicker here. It's coming. So, I think it's coming.
Can you take them back one slide?
All right, let's stop there. Okay. So if you would imagine a computer here being the consumer or one of your remote locations, what that broadband is going to do is going to give you access to so many things. The internet services, if you can take me to slide 6, the internet services that are out there now, the services from your local governments. I have listed up here corporate network, but that could very well be your government networks as well. And so it can give your consumer, or it can give your government agencies access to just a plethora of resources. But the other thing that it does is it exposes as well a lot of information that's out there as well. So with the access to broadband services, not just video or broadcast streaming of information, as you start using those broadband services for 911 activities, for healthcare activities, for government activities, you need to keep that information secure. And it does create a dilemma, because anytime you have those broadband services, and there's connection to all these other internet services that are out there, and there are connections to corporate networks and government networks that may be being kept secure by virtual private network technology and encryption. Where security is concerned, anytime there's a single point of connection between those two areas, even if you're encrypting the one, but you have open communication through another line, there's the opportunity for compromise. So some of the things that we do as an organization is to help municipalities, cities, corporate networks, and so forth keep those lines secure and develop strategies for keeping those lines secure. Because we're not going to really get everything out of the broadband services that we're capable of getting out of them until you're able to connect not just video streaming or access to the internet, but real services that can help individuals out there that are specific to their needs. So streaming information or getting information to consumers that have been targeted and specific for them. Safety information, traffic information that is specific for their use. Medical information that pertains strictly to them. You know, not until we can start doing those things are we going to be able to fully utilize the services of broadband networking. But at the same time, it does bring those security concerns. So I may ask you to help me here. Would you advance me one slide, please? Okay. So what are some common protection tactics that I've listed here? There are several of them that are quite common. But there's a dilemma that's out there. Having a strong broadband security policy is important. And so it's important to think through, well, what are the things that we're going to put in place from a broadband standpoint? How are we going to use those services? How are we going to secure those services? And those things are important to us as well. establishing usage priorities, quotas, partitioning of services, and so forth. As we extend that broadband to the consumer, there are ways that we can control, well, how much of that bandwidth are we going to allow the consumer to use? How much of that bandwidth are we going to allow other companies to use? How much of that bandwidth are we going to allow ourselves as governments to use? How do we implement quotas and partitioning, quality of service tactics that can be implemented within the broadband network? So we've got all of these different channels that are available for the different government agencies and for the homes and our users and so forth. It can be segmented so that when we run into situations in which we have a priority situation, we have to notify the public of dangers or things of concern to them. How do we partition the network so that that bandwidth is always available to government when they need it as well? How do we segment the network and implement quotas so that no one party is using more bandwidth than what we want them to be able to use so that other critical services are available to us? So these are all some of the things that we're facing as well. Establishing trusted communications at an application level. And so there are some services that may need to be encrypted, and there are some services that may not need to be encrypted. And a common strategy is to just, hey, let's just encrypt all. We'll encrypt everything that comes across the network. That might not necessarily be appropriate. And then the manner in which you're encrypting, it could be application-based. Well, we want to know this application is allowed to speak to and access this government resource, but it's the only one that we're going to allow to use that or access that over the broadband network. And so it becomes important to establish trusted communications from device to device or from application to application over the broadband network, and not just allow anyone access to the various assets that are on that broadband network. Next slide, please. So some of these tactics are not very new. Some of them are not complicated, but nonetheless, they might be uncommon within the broadband industry. And part of that might be because of funding and so forth, and part of it is maybe from a lack of planning. But enforcement of broadband security policy is important. So often we see organizations, they put policies in place, they put security policies in place, but they may lack the technology, the software to enforce it. And so just as important as having that strategy of how we're going to deploy broadband, how we're going to secure broadband, what policies we're going to put in place, is an understanding of, hey, what technology do we have available to us that we can put in place to make sure that those policies are enforced. Adequate auditing strategy. One of the things that we find is very prevalent and was limiting to some extent in the past was doing auditing. Saving information so that we can see who's accessing our network, when are they accessing it, what services are going over the network. Not so long ago, when you were doing auditing services, you had to be mindful of how much storage that auditing eats up because you're filing these audit logs, all of these audit logs, and it used up a lot of your resources. But more and more now, there's so much storage space that is available to us. There's no reason why we can't do a better job of auditing the services that are coming across those broadband networks. But we see a lot of organizations that are still not taking advantage of the auditing functions that exist within their resources, so that if they do run into situations, or even just from an understanding standpoint, they can go back and see, well, how is the network being used? What things can we utilize more? What things do we want to be concerned about? So auditing is going to play more and more an important role. I mentioned a common framework here because a lot of the reasons why we don't have some of the services that are available, that broadband network can make available to us, is that there is no common framework. And so for municipalities and states to join together and really sit down and figure out, well, what platforms are we going to deploy? What features do we want to deploy within our networks that will allow all of us to take advantage of it, is one of the things that have to be discussed within this modern environment and with broadband so that we can utilize all of those services. Adequate incident response strategy. So there are some things that are going to go wrong. If you have a network out there, someone's going to be able to hack it. And so you have to be able to respond to incidences when they happen. And you're not going to be able to totally prevent them. But with the introduction of more and more data to these broadband networks, some of that data being personal data and private data, you've got to be concerned with how are we going to respond to incidences. Do we have redundant strategies in place that allow us to continue operating if we do run into a problem? And I've seen a lot of organizations, their redundant strategy is, well, we need to make sure that we have a duplicate network or dual everything. We need to have standby systems that we can turn up immediately if things go wrong. And a lot of times that's not practical. So a lot of organizations will pursue that, but a lot of times that just is not practical. And so one of the most important things is from a planning standpoint, you might not have an immediately available standby system, but you do have a plan for how we're going to respond. Not too long ago, it was common practice, hey, if you run into a system that's been compromised, you need to immediately shut it down. Well, one of the things that we tell our clients now is more important than shutting it down is if you have an incident, is knowing immediately how you're going to respond. A lot of our clients we tell, do not shut your system down. You want to unplug it from the network, but don't shut it down because there's valuable information in that memory, in that volatile memory that we can't get if you shut your system down. We can't tell, well, how much has this problem proliferated your network, how did it start, were passwords stolen. And so if you unplug your various systems from the network and you're able to quickly respond in doing that, it gives forensic teams like some of the ones that we have an opportunity to come in, look at the memory that's still on that system, the volatile memory, and pull information off of that, as well as then digging a little deeper and finding out what happened. So all of those strategies become important as we give more and more access to some of that private data on these broadband networks. Next slide, please. And so the Department of Homeland Security is funding for different states and territories development of different common frameworks. And one of those is a security common framework. I've listed the website here that we're going to make the slides available to you. But they haven't made it available, at least for free, to municipalities. It's just free to the states. And so it's important for different municipalities, cities, and so forth to be in touch and communicate with the states so that there's a concerted effort to extend those services to those areas as well, giving the municipalities access to some of those free development services as well. And so you want to find out more about that. The next slide is my last slide. And so there are other organizations that are out there now. The Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center is a free service that municipalities can sign up for. It's funded by the federal government as well, but it provides excellent information concerning securing broadband networks in general. I always say, hey, follow the feds. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they've got all kinds of stuff out there about securing communications. And oftentimes you can't utilize all of the methods that are mentioned or provided by them. But it's important to be aware of them and determine, well, how can we deploy some of those things in our network? How can we get our vendors that are offering these services to us to comply or contractually agree or through service level agreements, make sure that our broadband security strategy is supported by the vendors that we have. All of those things are important. And then the last one up there, FedRAMP.gov, they're doing a lot of work with cloud computing. And so that's becoming more and more relevant as we move towards broadband. And I believe it's very important to at least understand some of the security measures that they're recommending so that you can consider implementing them into your broadband strategy as well. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. And you have some questions for me, maybe, Doug?
Yeah, real quick. So how scared are companies to actually use the internet and move to the cloud, if they even understand what the cloud is, which most don't? How scared are people to actually move and become more efficient and online using the internet, broadband? How scared are they right now? And how do you tell them to, just go for it?
Okay. Well, one of the things that we found is that most government organizations aren't scared to move towards it. It's a matter of what resources are available to them. So they may not have the resources to move towards it. They may not have the department to move towards it. A lot of the commercial and private organizations are concerned about security. They are concerned about privacy. They are concerned about control, protecting that data. But the information that you're concerned about protecting, it's out there. I mean, it's out there already. And so the important thing is to have a good, strong strategy for protecting it, and a good, strong strategy for how we're going to respond when there are compromises. And so one of the issues that organizations that assess, like your organization, Doug, that helps other organizations determine what strategy to move forward with, is what things do we put in place to adequately ensure that your protection interests are addressed, that your ability to respond if there is an incident are addressed. Those are the critical things that we need to concern ourselves with. With municipalities, as I mentioned, the big deal is with resources. You know, how do we get the resources that we need? How do we get these other vendor organizations to share the visions that we have? And so that's one of the biggest things for them. But as we offer more and more of those services, security is going to be important for the municipalities as well. As we are getting the resources that we need, as we are getting those vendor organizations and that last bit of fiber to the homes, as we do develop these frameworks, we're going to be exposing ourselves to the opportunity to compromise some of the sensitive data that's out there. And so that's something that they're going to have to be concerned with more and more in the future.
Great, thank you very much. So not your program, if you could just hand off the microphone to Jeremy Pietzold. I don't think Jeremy has a presentation. He's from Sandy, Oregon. He is the City Council President. He's going to be talking about what they're doing in Sandy with their fiber network. Sandy Pietzold. Wow, that's really nice.
Yeah. You can just go ahead and shut that off if you don't mind. I was asked last Friday if I'd come and present, so I don't have any slides or anything like that. So just want to start off by saying welcome to Natoa. Wow. All right. Okay, we need better coffee. So I'll go ahead and start. My name is Jeremy Pietzold, and I'm the City Council President in the City of Sandy, a little town outside of Portland towards Mount Hood. I'm also the chair of the SandyNet board, where we have our own municipal ISP, and I'll talk to you, that's what my presentation here will be about. So, but my day job, I don't get paid to do any of that. I don't get paid to come here and hang out with all you guys this morning. But my day job is I am a network engineer for all the schools in our county, and so I do have an extensive background in fiber and in networks. And it's kind of a passion and dream of mine to be doing ISP at this level. So I want to ask a question, so you're going to have to listen up here. How many people here have Google Fiber? Okay, I see a few people's heads come up. How many people in here is Google thinking about coming to? You know, at least 1, 2, 3. All right, well, as far as those of you that don't have Google Fiber, we're right there with you. Google's not coming to Sandy. And why should we be left out? So we started 13 years ago. Our city one day tried to get DSL at City Hall, and it wasn't available. Couldn't get DSL at City Hall. All we could get was dial-up. And 13 years ago, not very long ago. So the city council at the time, which I was not a part of, decided we got to do something about this. And so they went down the, oh, hey, there you go. We went down the path of starting our own municipal ISP with starting with the DSLAM and doing DSL. I wish I could get that money back. It's very expensive, or we thought it was, or we were told how to do it, and by consultants that it made it very expensive. But we expanded that. We went to being a WISP, a wireless ISP. And so, and as we did, we grew, and we were able to actually turn down our DSL because DSL was just too slow for the connections that we were able to provide through our wireless ISP. When I got in city council here 8 years ago, one of my first things, I think I scared all the rest of the city councilors, was to talk about bringing fiber. We got to expand our fiber footprint inside the city to connect our other city hall buildings, public works and the community center, and how we could save money. And I think they just thought of me as some passionate young kid that, all right, and just agreed and went along with it. But it also demonstrated what we were able to save money-wise by doing so. And so that expanded through our downtown. We were able to take fiber to different businesses and being able to offer our small businesses gig fiber for less than they were able to get for T1 lines at the time. About 5 years ago or so, our county was able to receive a BTOP grant, which I was able to help with the writing of that. And Debbie McCoy's here. She was a partner in crime and being able to help write that grant. And a lot of you might have gotten some BTOP. Anyone get BTOP grants? All right. Yeah, it's bittersweet. Red tape. We can all have beer later. So the county was able to get that and being able to help design that around our county, which was mainly a forest-type industry that was dying off because of new regulations. And so we were able to put this fiber ring around our county and came through Sandy, which allowed us to get cheaper transport, basically bandwidth, back into Portland, where most of the ISPs in our area would come from. And so that basically gave us unlimited amount of bandwidth so what we could offer our citizens in Sandy for our wireless ISP. But it was 5 NATOAs ago. It was the first NATOA that Joe, who's in the back there, and I came to NATOA. It was in D.C., and got pretty excited. I was running for city council again, and I was debating whether or not to announce if we should push this fiber to the home project before or after the election cycle. And so I kind of waited till after because my opponent wasn't really aware of what fiber was. So as soon as that was over, we started pushing fiber to the home and expanding, getting off of our wireless ISP. Wireless is great. It did wonders for us, but as we all know, the technology is getting slower because of the bandwidth of Netflix and those type of things that are taking over. And we really saturated our community with wireless. We weren't really able to expand it anymore and really took it to its max with about 1,400 customers inside our small city. We have about a 4 square mile city, so it was a lot of airwaves being used. So over that time, we worked with people like Joanne, I thought she was in here, Hovis, would call us up once in a while, and I'd be like, Joanne called us. That's pretty cool. She's an amazing resource and helped us out immensely, and had a lot of questions of us on how we were deploying and how we were going through the process. We tried doing a public-private partnership, and is anyone out there doing a private-public partnership with fiber in their community? Okay, I've got the scars. So it can be hard. It can be really hard because as a public agency, we're looking after our citizens, because our citizens are who own us as a municipal ISP. And so, and they're looking after their shareholders, rightfully so. I mean, those are the people that invested in their environment. So it's really hard to get through. We signed with 2 different companies at different times. One company got bought out by the other, and we just couldn't come to an agreement that really protected our residents and our citizens that we thought that we needed. And so we ended up parting ways. We went with another type of public partnership, private partnership, with a company of OFS. They're here today. This one was, we paid them. and they're the private company that's installing the fiber. But we will own it and run it and maintain it. And so we didn't, as a public, go in and install it ourselves, but we hired them to do that. So we're building about 43 miles of fiber inside our city. And one of the things that we've always been big on doing is keeping our price point low. And they're scrolling through our little website here that isn't, like Google, but so they may have already showed you the prices. But we're offering two services: 100 meg service for $39.95 a month, and gig for $59.95 a month. And so one of our mottos as we were trying to promote our fiber through this process is why wait for Google? And we thought it was very important also to be cheaper than what Google was offering in Kansas City. Because as we realized, we can still make a lot of money and not charge $70 a month for gig fiber. One of the things that here recently, we just, a week and a half ago, just did our fiber splicing, kind of like a ribbon cutting, but we thought would be unique. Done a lot of ribbon cuttings. You go and you give a speech and you cut the ribbon and everyone cheers and you have a couple cookies and you move on for a business. But we want to do something a little bit bigger, and OFS helped us do that and step up and help sponsor ours. But we took one of our parks and we put in gig fiber into our park. And we set up a big tent and invited everyone on Facebook and throughout the city in the press. And so we had about 150 people show up at a park, catered it with a nice barbecue, and set up TVs. And the mayor went up and, instead of cutting a ribbon, actually had a camera on a fusion splicer and actually hit the button. And so it was like a nuclear bomb on this TV, and so the audience was like, and so then Joe went over and hit the button to do a speed test out to the internet, 980 megs or something like that, to a small park with a basketball court and a jungle gym. Sorry, it was a lot of hard work, and we finally made it. So then we had TVs and things showing what we're going to offer. We're going to offer television and phone through other partners, third parties, because we really don't believe that the TV in the way it is going to be is going to last very long. Just like the telephone isn't lasting very long as a home telephone. The cell phone has taken over that arena. And over the top is doing the same thing for TV. But we're able to offer that IP right across our fiber and show the amazing quality that it can bring as well. We also set up a bunch of fusion splicers so that kids could come up, parents, people come up and actually splice their own fiber, which is pretty exciting, educational, maybe get some new future engineers out there because of that. But as I said at that meeting, this is history being made in this park. In Oregon, in Sandy, there's not very many communities at all, or any communities that we're aware of, that the complete city is gig fibered up in Oregon. And so we're making history. It was like the day when the telephone first arrived in our town. I wasn't there. It was over 100 years ago. But I was here for the fiber splicing of gig fiber. Or was I there for when electricity came? Those were memorable days that changed the future of our town in Sandy. And I wonder what it was like that day when they made the first phone call, when they turned that first light bulb on. So, as a network engineer, I want people to look at our fiber and forget about it. I don't want them to know it's even there. And you might think that, well, that's funny. I want it to act like it's a sewer system or a water system. Do people think about when they flush the toilet or do the dishes where that water is going. No, it just works. It just goes. They don't really worry about capacity. We worry on the back end as a city. Same with water. Is there enough water? They turn the faucet on, it's there. As much water as they want, unless you live in California. But the point is it's there. Why should we restrict it? Why should we restrict it to 10 megs, 50 megs, 100 megs? And why should we charge prices just because we can? Why couldn't we just open it up and, like the sewage, as much sewage as you can pump down it, let it go. As much internet as you can get through the pipe, let it go. It's not costing us really any more money. And I can say that as an engineer, not as a politician. That really isn't costing us any more money to be able to offer a gig than it is to offer 100 megs or is to offer 10 megs. Actually, it's better for the network to offer the gig than it is the 10 megs. So anyways, there's a new group we just joined called Next Century Cities. Has anyone here heard of it in here? Mary Beth? Great, yeah, and so we'll be going down to that event in California. We're excited to be a founding member. We are, I think, definitely the smallest city on that list, but we have the values that align with Next Century Cities, and we're excited that there's an organization that believes the same thing that we do, that we shouldn't be restricting bandwidth. We should be allowing it to everyone in our community, and it will expand our economic growth, but not only that, it expands our livability. That's all.
Okay. I just have a couple quick questions, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. I'm sorry if I missed this. What's the population of Sandy?
The population is 10,000, right? 9,999.
Okay. And do businesses and households, do they grasp what they're getting here? Do they understand what this means, or they're just like?
Some do. I think one of the best things for us is Google. In Portland, being announced as one of the cities that may possibly get Google Fiber.
Okay.
When that hit, we were already in the works in putting it in, already signed our contracts and installing our fiber. But when that hit, everyone then goes, gig, we know what gig is. We want gig,
Right.
gig, And so in a way, we're like, we wanted to be, hey, we want to take advantage of this in our community economically and bringing more businesses to Sandy. But this has definitely not hurt that. This has helped us in a lot of ways because everyone goes, well, we want gig too. Oh, we're already bringing it to you, and we'll beat Google by a year or two, So I think people are realizing that aspect. When we did the demonstration in the park and had the TVs where there is no buffering, when they're trying to watch Netflix or Hulu or any of those type of things, they actually get to realize this is a big difference.
Great. Do we need to use this microphone is this?
I'm Rob Billingsley from Arlington County. Question is on SandyNet. How did you go about determining that $39.95 was a good price point for your gig? Did you do that by some sort of market study of what competition was doing, if there was any? And, or was it just determining what people were willing to pay?
Sure. Actually, the gig is $59.95. The 100 meg is
I'm sorry,
$39.
$59.
And actually, our goal at SandyNet has always been to keep the prices as low as possible. We don't have houses in Hawaii or drive Lamborghinis. But the shareholders are the citizens, and so unlike some other companies where when they raise the price, you can't just unelect them. They're a Fortune 500 company or whatever. In our town, they can just elect someone else in to make the price better than they want. So one of the things was we wanted to find out, well, how much does it cost us to run it, and then add a little bit more so we can maintain and grow the network. And so we kind of looked at what the cost would be to build it, maintain it, and operate it. And Joe, standing in the back there, is a master of spreadsheets. Him and the business manager, city manager, have some elaborate spreadsheets on Google Docs, by the way, all in the cloud there. Some wizards there, and basically form the formulas and create the graphs to figure out exactly where we needed to be. And it was a driving force from the SandyNet board that we keep it as low as possible. We wanted to keep it under $40. It is our wireless system currently is $25, and so this is a little bit more expensive than our wireless solution, which we will be taking down. And so people are kind of complaining that $40 is too expensive. And we get chuckles out there, but in a community that's been paying, $20 to $25 for the same, not the same service, but in their minds can be the same service. That's kind of hard to chew on. I do have to say that our council is very receptive to the whole fiber, and when we were setting the prices, there was a debate on whether or not we should just make one tier, gig only, at $39.95 a month. And believe me, I was excited, but I also feared staff, as they were very cautious on, well, we can do that in a year. Let's just get through the first part of it and make sure, because we know that we can afford it at $40 a month as well. So.
Oh, Rick Elrod, Fairfax County. I had a question on the security side. I've heard suggestions about rewriting the basic internet protocols to allow for better security than the TCP/IP system provides for. Do you think anything like that's likely to happen in the foreseeable future?
I believe that it'll have to happen as you start offering more and more services that put personal information at risk. That you're going to have higher, more secure algorithms that are used to secure that information. And so what organizations will do, or what municipalities may do, is to the extent that they are going to have that type of information out there, or to the extent that they're going to allow users of their network to have that information out there, they'll have to sit down and have, I'll call them, say, user agreements. Hey, if you're going to use our network to do these things, then your encryption algorithms will have to be to this standard. You'll have to use these type of encryptions. And they may offer choices, but they're standards that their users would have to abide by if they're going to put private information out there.
My question is actually a little different. The reason that's necessary, as I understand it, is that the basic internet protocols that run the whole internet were never designed to provide for high security because people simply didn't conceive it that way when the thing was founded. I've heard ideas suggested that we have to go back to the beginning and rewrite the basic protocols for the internet to build security into them from the beginning to make it possible to have really robust security. I'm wondering whether something like that, as opposed to kind of case-by-case agreements, is ever likely to happen.
I don't think that, and would advise against case-by-case agreements, because that would be tough to manage from a municipal or government standpoint. So it wouldn't be case-by-case. There would be some standards that are developed. But there are organizations, there are municipalities, federal government, private industries that are laying adequate, and with the increased bandwidth capabilities, that are overlaying adequate encryption algorithms over top of the existing internet services that are out there. So whereas before it may have been difficult to do that, with the increased bandwidth now we can use the existing infrastructure to put appropriate encryption algorithms out there.
I have a question for Jeremy. Mm-hmm. And first of all, Jeremy, congratulations to SandyNet. What a great thing.
Congratulate Joe, he's in the back.
Congratulations, Joe. Did the city bond for the fiber? How did you end up paying for it, and over how long a term?
We had a pop can drive, and we raised, no, sorry. In Oregon, we get 5 cents per pop can. No, we did we bonded it. We had a revenue bond, and so the revenue is coming off of the service that we have are paying for that bond back. So it's for 20 years, and all our models are showing that we will pay that back early in possibly 10 years. That's how we're doing it.
Thank you.
My name is Larry Dunbar, Ellensburg, Washington State.
Yeah.
My question is for Jeremy as well, is how did you charge customers for extending the fiber optics to their homes and businesses? And
Sure.
then secondly, do you offer the gig as the service level, or do you share that gig amongst maybe 100 or 500 customers, and that's what they get?
Sure. So the first part of your question, do we charge to get the service to the businesses and the homes? So currently, we have charged to extend the service from our main trunk lines to businesses, but we'll take that charge and put it over a 5-year type of contract or something like that, and that's where we actually have contracts. And so if it costs $17,000 to build from the trunk line to their particular business, we'll finance that over the 5 years. And so their payment might be $125 or $200 for that gig connection back into the backbone there. For homes, during this build out, we have said that all installations are free. We're building out to whoever signs up, and we aren't charging that. So sign up now, because later it may cost you. And that's basically because we have the crews on the ground going around the entire city. We're putting orange conduit everywhere as we put it in, and right now we can do that. We also are not doing contracts, and we are providing the modem and everything there free as well. So we're really unique. You know, we take a risk, but we believe the service is, why wouldn't you want to do that? And it's fairly priced. Your second question was, are we giving gig out to each individual? As a network engineer, I run these graphs and have for almost 20 years, knowing that you can oversubscribe. And so our trunk lines out to the internet can be a gig or 10 gig, and we monitor that as we have multiple lines out, that and seeing where we are on that bandwidth and being able to increase that when we need to. With our dark fiber leaving Sandy, it's quite easy to do. And then, so we don't need to overbuy the bandwidth, but when we need to, it's very easy to turn that up to the speeds we need to. We also peer with NWAX. I sit on the NWAX board, which is a local peering exchange point, which I recommend to any of those people out here that are looking at doing their own ISPs. Please peer with your local exchange, because it keeps that traffic local. It doesn't have to go across the internet. And so we peer with people like Netflix and people like Google. And just give you an idea, about 70% of all our traffic goes to Netflix. So that's free for us. So the amount of bandwidth needing to go out to our ISPs that we buy from, that traffic doesn't even go there. And it's quick, it's fast, and they give us the super high definition signal. So as far as that goes, we are using a PON system. It's not an active system out there, so we do have splitters out there. But with the technology that's changing, we'll be able to increase that in the future easily to 10 gig or DWDM PON quite easily, since the fiber is already in the ground. I hope that answers your question.
John McHugh, City of St. Louis Park. Jeremy, now that you're abandoning your subscribers that can afford a $25 price point and only offering a $40, are you the lowest cost internet provider in Sandy, or has everybody agreed that $40 is what everyone should pay?
We increased our price from $19.95 to $25 here about 2 years ago. Is that right, Joe? Yeah, 2 years ago. And the DSL provider there, the local telephone provider, started offering, $19.95 a month, and but our subscription base stayed the same. People realized it was a better product, a better service, faster service, I should say. And so that hasn't been an issue at all. Here in the last couple of years, the cable company has started offering internet, but their speeds cost more than our $40 for a lot less speeds. So you can get DSL for cheaper, but you want DSL or do you want a gig or 100 megs? And so we've actually seen a lot more. Our take rate has gone up immensely with just the fiber going out. So we're actually gaining a lot of subscribers right now during the build out.
I think we have time for one last question.
Thank you very much. I'm Laura Breeden. I'm from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration in Washington, home of BTOP. So I wanted to ask the two BTOP, but if not recipients, people involved with BTOP projects on the panel, would you do it again? And informally, I'll ask any of you who had these awards to come and talk to me about what happened, what you learned, where you'd like to go from here. But I would be interested in your thoughts about what the BTOP funding, how it changed the landscape in your community.
Go
I have
ahead.
to say, too, I'm a little nervous when we start talking about sewers and then we talk about Netflix. These analogies can get really
Smelly.
muddy.
So I could provide a few comments on Open Cape, which, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, but I also serve on the board of Open Cape outside of my role at Sienna. So, the board of Open Cape, I think, is very appreciative of what BTOP did to help push that project forward. Open Cape was conceived before, ARA and BTOP came into being, actually through some state-level funding, but it was, seed funding. And BTOP really helped make the construction a reality. And, now we're at a point, as I said earlier, we've got this backbone built. We have a set of first users on, and we're struggling. I wish we were in the position that Jeremy is, where we had a last-mile facility to provide these kind of services, including at my house. But anyway, would we do it again? Absolutely. I think, we need to reach sustainability, so that's what we're, working on right now.
Thank you.
So the city of Sandy didn't get a BTOP grant. The county did around us. And since I helped write that with Debbie, and in my hat as a network engineer for all the schools in the county, the BTOP was amazing. Would I do it again? 1,000 times over. And that really kick-started bandwidth growth, not only for my unpaid job at SandyNet in the city of Sandy, but my paid job, with working with all the schools in the county. For instance, in the county, it's $250 a month for dark fiber anywhere in the county, 2 strands, whatever you put on it. So I got one high school that went to 20 gigs, used dual-stranded optics, just so they could have bragging rights for 20 gig instead of everyone else with 10 gig. It didn't cost them any more money a month, just a couple dollars more in optics. But the city of Sandy benefited from that because that gave us this ring capacity outside of our city to get back into where we could pick up cheap ISP. Because we were out on the fringes, and so to get ISP would just cost a lot of money in transport to get back into those places. And I'll have to say, the city of Sandy did get a BIP grant. If anyone out here get BIP grants? Okay, good. That was a totally different experience. And we did that for our rural community outside of our city, wireless project. And the federal government still owes us a lot of money that we cannot get from them. And doing this project, we had to satisfy some of the federal BIP grant. It actually hindered us doing the fiber project on our own here is because of that BIP grant. And we had to pay part of that off with what the feds owed us to be able to go forward. So would I do that one again? Not on your life.
On behalf of the federal government, I apologize.
You're working with BTOP, right? So
I will say it was a different agency. And who would like to have the microphone? Where should I?
I'll come get it from you in a second. But
Thanks.
first, I want to say that at 10:30 we have maximizing your network potential. So we have a short break. And if you could, everybody could join me in thanking Chris, Jerome, and Jeremy for this session.